For most of his adult life, Calvin Mitchell had everything a man could ask for: success, respect, and a reputation that stretched far beyond his hometown of Austin, Texas. At 56, he wasn't just a wealthy man, he was a builder, a creator, the kind of person who didn't inherit his fortune but earned it, brick by brick, through long hours and steady decisions. Calvin was the founder and CEO of AgriPure Systems, a company known for revolutionizing sustainable farming with smart irrigation technologies. He had grown up on a farm himself and never forgot the scent of soil or the sting of losing a crop to drought. That's why he poured everything into helping the next generation of farmers avoid those same hardships. But for all his business acumen, Calvin was a private soul, quiet, measured, and in the eyes of those who truly knew him, a gentle man who preferred quiet Sunday mornings to boardroom applause. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His two-story home in West Austin was tasteful, stone and cedar, not marble and glass. He drove a mid-range SUV, not a sports car. And when he traveled, it was for charity work or speaking engagements, not tropical getaways. His life took a tragic turn in 2019 when Margaret, his second wife of 12 years, lost her battle with cancer. Those who knew Calvin say he was never quite the same after she passed. He withdrew from the public eye, declined event invitations, and even reduced his hours at the company. It wasn't that he stopped caring. It was that grief became his quiet companion. The only comfort came from his two adult children. At night, the house echoed. The clink of a teacup, the creak of a floorboard. Sounds Calvin once found comforting now felt like reminders of all that was gone. He would sometimes catch himself speaking aloud, out of habit, calling Margaret's name from across the hall before remembering she was no longer there. The silence that followed was the kind that didn't just settle, it pressed on his chest. He kept her slippers by the bed, her scarf hanging on the back of the door. In the garden, he never touched the marigolds she planted, just watched them bloom and wilt with the seasons, as if they alone still knew how to follow her rhythm. Sometimes, late at night, Calvin would lie in bed with the lamp still on and replay Margaret's old voicemails, just to hear her say, "Love you, Cal," one more time. He never deleted the last text she sent him before her final hospital stay. It simply read, "Save me a piece of the apple pie," smiley face, casual, warm, unaware it would become her last words to him. On what would have been their anniversary, he placed yellow tulips on her pillow and left them there all day, like a conversation unspoken. And every time he passed the hallway mirror, he half expected to see her reflection beside his. She had been his compass. Without her, he wandered, even in his own home. Once he told Marcus over the phone, "I still reach for her hand in the middle of the night. And I still feel it for just a second." There was silence on the line after that. Some things don't need a response. Grief didn't announce itself. It simply stayed. It followed him into board meetings and into the grocery store, into every moment people assumed he had moved on. But he hadn't. He just learned to wear it better. Friends tried to set him up. "You're still young," they'd say. "You need companionship." He'd always smile politely and say, "I'm fine," but deep down he wasn't. Calvin missed being touched. Not just physically, emotionally. He missed being someone's first thought in the morning, someone's safe place at night. So when Jasmine came along, with her radiant energy and effortless attention, it wasn't just the age gap he ignored. It was the warning signs, the pacing, the too perfect smile. He wanted to believe love could find him again. He needed to. He mentioned Jasmine for the first time over coffee with Harold Mitchell, his oldest friend and former business partner. They met once a month at a quiet diner off Highway 71. Harold, sharp as ever at 71, had seen Calvin through both marriages and most of his career. "She listens," Calvin said, stirring his tea slowly. "Really listens." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You mean she listens to your heart or your holdings?" Calvin gave a tired smile. "I don't know. Maybe both. But she makes me feel like I'm not invisible." Harold didn't push further. But as Calvin talked about Jasmine's laugh, her kindness, her energy, something in Harold's expression shifted. Not doubt, but worry. Still, he didn't say the one thing he was thinking. Loneliness can make even smart men ignore smoke when it's coming from a fire. Danielle, now 30, worked in private wealth management in Dallas. She had inherited her father's sense of discipline, always the one asking tough questions and keeping the books clean. Marcus, 28, was an engineer based in Houston. He had his mother's soft eyes and his father's mind for logic. He called home every Sunday, like clockwork, and always asked Dad if he needed anything. After Margaret's passing, the family grew closer. Birthdays turned into quiet dinners. Holidays meant home-cooked meals and memories that tasted like sweet potato pie and roasted ham. So when Calvin began missing those dinners, skipping phone calls, rescheduling visits, Danielle and Marcus knew something had changed. And they were right. It all started at a charity fundraiser in early 2024. Calvin rarely attended those kinds of events anymore, but a friend had convinced him to make an appearance. The fundraiser, held in Miami, was for a nonprofit that supported rural tech education. It was a cause dear to Calvin's heart, and it was there, between the soft jazz of the string quartet and the clink of champagne flutes, that he met Jasmine Rowe. She was 26, striking, with long curls and an effortless way of lighting up a room. A former Instagram fitness influencer with 140,000 followers and a camera-ready smile. She spoke of wellness, reinvention, and chasing happiness. But what Calvin didn't know, what no one knew, was how many times Jasmine had reinvented herself. 3 years earlier, she had been evicted from a cramped studio apartment in El Paso, behind on rent, ghosted by the same business coach who once promised to triple her brand deals. The fitness brand she tried to launch, Row Recharged, had flopped after a month. Sponsors dropped her. Engagement fell. She resorted to stage photos in borrowed gyms, wearing clothes she later returned for refunds. She wasn't evil. Not yet. Just tired. Tired of chasing likes that didn't convert. Tired of holding a yoga pose while her phone's battery hit 3%. Tired of pretending she was healing when all she felt was stuck. When she saw Calvin at that fundraiser, polished, gentle, a little lost in the room, something clicked. Not attraction. Opportunity. She didn't see an old man. She saw a future. A man who wouldn't question her past because he didn't understand how Instagram algorithms worked. A man who didn't scroll deep enough to find the old Jasmine. The one who once tweeted, "If this doesn't work, I'll go back to bottle service." A man whose loneliness was as visible as his bank balance. So she did what she did best. She smiled. She listened. She mirrored everything he missed about being married. Presence, attention, warmth. To her, it wasn't love. It was strategy. And this time, she told herself it would work. Because this time, she wasn't trying to be famous. She was trying to be secure. She laughed at Calvin's dry jokes. She touched his arm when she spoke. She listened, really listened, to a man who had spent the last 5 years in silence and solitude. Jasmine felt like sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. They exchanged numbers, then calls, then visits. Within weeks, she was flying in and out of Austin regularly, staying for long weekends, sharing photos of sunsets and garden dinners on her Instagram story, always with a warm caption. Grateful for this kind soul. By spring, Calvin was smitten. By summer, he was engaged. And on May 25th, 2024, under the sprawling oaks of a private estate in Fredericksburg, Calvin Mitchell married Jasmine Rowe in an intimate ceremony of fewer than 30 guests. Danielle and Marcus weren't among them. They hadn't been invited. In the early weeks of their marriage, Jasmine Rowe seemed like a breath of fresh air in Calvin's life. She filled the house with laughter, music, and a kind of energy that hadn't lived there since Margaret's passing. Calvin smiled more. He dressed sharper. He even started using Instagram, though no one but Jasmine knew the password. To the outside world, it was a beautiful second chance at love. But to Danielle and Marcus, it felt like a well-rehearsed performance. Danielle saw the red flags first. She had worked in finance long enough to know what sudden access looked like. Just 3 weeks after the wedding, Jasmine was added to Calvin's American Express Centurion account, a black card reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Full privileges, no spending cap. Then came the jewelry, a 3-carat diamond ring from a high-end jeweler in downtown Austin. Then the new Porsche Taycan, parked right in the driveway, registered to AgriPure Systems, Calvin's company. Jasmine posted about it all on social media. The wine tastings, the spa weekends, the infinity pool overlooking the Texas hills. Her captions, always sweet, always hashtagged with phrases like hashtag blessed and hashtag love wins. But behind the filters, Danielle saw a strategy. Meanwhile, Marcus had noticed changes in his father too, subtle at first. Calvin had started missing their weekly Sunday calls, blaming spotty Wi-Fi, or back-to-back meetings. When they did speak, he sounded distracted, distant. Marcus asked him twice if everything was okay. Calvin always replied with the same vague reassurance. She makes me feel young again, son. Isn't that worth something? Danielle wasn't so convinced. She made a quiet call to Michael Brock, Calvin's longtime estate attorney. He'd managed Calvin's legal affairs for over 15 years and had always been upfront with the family. But this time he was hesitant, reserved. All I can say, he told Danielle carefully, is that changes are being made. Changes. That word stayed with her, like a fog that wouldn't lift. Then, one evening in late June, Danielle received a notification from a financial platform tied to the family's investment portfolio. It showed activity, new logins, recent updates. She didn't have access to all the details, but it was enough to know something was shifting behind closed doors. Within days, she learned the truth. Jasmine had been named the sole beneficiary of Calvin's personal estate. The trust had been revised. The assets, properties, accounts, even majority shares in AgriPure were now under Jasmine's name, should anything happen to him. Danielle was stunned, not just by the change, but by how fast it had happened. Calvin hadn't even been married 2 months. She reached out again, called, texted, left voicemails. No reply. Then Marcus tried. Same result. Worried, Danielle booked a flight to Austin and drove straight to the family home. When she arrived at the gate, the security code had been changed. She pressed the intercom. Jasmine answered. Your father's resting, she said sweetly. He's been feeling a little tired lately. Danielle clenched her fists. I'm his daughter, and I'm his wife, Jasmine replied, smiling into the camera. Please don't make a scene. Then the line went dead. Danielle stood there, heart pounding, staring at the gate that had always opened for her, that had opened on Christmas mornings and summer barbecues. Now it was closed, just like her father. For a long moment, Danielle didn't move. The quiet hum of the security box was the only sound. She stared into the lens of the camera, like she was trying to burn a hole through it. Then, without thinking, she pressed the intercom again. Jasmine, she said, trying to keep her voice level, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're not going to win. That's my father in there. Not your puppet. Not your paycheck. There was silence on the other end. Then a soft click, and Jasmine's voice returned, smooth as silk. Danielle, you're clearly upset. I understand. Change is hard for some people. But this is Calvin's home. Our home now. You don't get to dictate the rules anymore. Danielle's throat tightened. You've known him for what, 6 months? You think that gives you the right to shut us out? I think, Jasmine replied, her tone laced with quiet threat, that if your father wanted you here, he'd have given you the code. Click. The intercom went dark for good this time. Danielle stood frozen, knuckles white, fists clenched at her sides. For the first time in her life, she felt like a stranger in the very place she used to feel most safe. That stone and cedar house wasn't just her childhood home. It was where her mother had sung carols in the kitchen, where her father used to fall asleep on the couch with his glasses still on. Now, there was a stranger in the doorway, wearing a silk robe, guarding it like a queen who had seized her castle. Danielle backed away slowly, eyes burning, fury simmering beneath her composure. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. That night, she called Marcus. Something's wrong, she whispered into the phone. I can feel it. Marcus didn't disagree. He had already started digging into public records, looking for anything, property transfers, company shares, financial proxies. What he found only added to their fear. Jasmine was everywhere. She wasn't just Calvin's wife. She had become his gatekeeper. She had legal power of attorney, full access to his digital life, and was suddenly listed as co-director on new filings with the state business registry. It was as if she'd replaced not just Calvin's wife, but his children too. And then came a moment that confirmed Danielle's worst fear. She found a deleted Instagram story, briefly captured by a follower, where Jasmine twirled in front of a mirror, wearing Calvin's wedding ring on a necklace and mouthing the words to a pop song. "Once he's gone, it's all mine." It was meant to be cute, playful, but to Danielle, it sounded like a prophecy, a dark one. She didn't know it yet, but the clock was ticking, and Calvin Mitchell had less than 2 months to live. It was the last Friday of August. The Texas air was still thick with summer heat, even as the sun dipped below the hills. At the Mitchell estate, a sprawling home nestled in the gated community of Barton Creek, the lights around the pool glowed a soft blue. To the outside world, it looked like a scene from a lifestyle magazine. Inside, though, something felt wrong. At exactly 8:42 p.m., a 911 call came in from the residence. The voice on the other end was Jasmine Rowe, shaky, frantic, but oddly composed. "My husband, he's not breathing. He's by the pool. Please just hurry." Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes. They found Calvin Mitchell lying face down near the pool's edge, his limbs limp, his skin pale but dry. No signs of struggle, no water in his lungs. They turned him over. His lips were slightly blue. No pulse. CPR was initiated immediately, but by 9:06 p.m., Calvin was declared dead at the scene. Jasmine stood nearby in a white silk robe, barefoot, her eyes wide and glassy. She told the paramedics Calvin had been complaining of fatigue earlier that day, said he'd had a glass of red wine with dinner, that he was tired and just wanted to relax by the pool. "I'll only step away for a minute," she insisted. "I want to get towels when I came back." Her voice trailed off, but something about the scene didn't sit right with one of the EMTs. It wasn't what was there, it was what was missing. There were no spilled drinks, no overturned chairs, no panic in Jasmine's movements. She hadn't attempted CPR. She hadn't even touched him. And then came another red flag. When investigators asked to review the security camera footage from the property, Jasmine said the system had gone offline the night before due to glitch. She said she had called a technician, but hadn't had time to follow up. A tech crew was dispatched to the home the next day. What they discovered was alarming. The entire surveillance system, including pool cameras, garage feeds, and cloud backups, had all gone offline at exactly 11:42 p.m. the night before Calvin died. Worse yet, the hard drives had been manually wiped, not corrupted by error, but erased with intention. Still, for the moment, Calvin's cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, pending toxicology. Jasmine, as his legal spouse and newly appointed estate executor, requested an expedited cremation. She said Calvin wouldn't have wanted a long process. She said he hated hospitals. She said his children wouldn't understand. And she was right about that last part. Because when Danielle and Marcus got the call from a cousin that Calvin had died, they weren't just shocked. They were blindsided. They hadn't even been informed. By the time they arrived in Austin 2 days later, their father's body was gone, cremated, no autopsy performed, no final goodbye. And Jasmine? She was already making arrangements, contacting Calvin's board members, hiring estate managers, and holding a private memorial service they weren't even invited to. She's hiding something. Marcus said that night, standing outside the gates of the home he once called his own. Danielle didn't reply. She just stared at the house, at the lit-up windows, the empty driveway, the flicker of candlelight through the kitchen blinds, and felt her heart sink. Everything about it felt too clean, too perfect, too planned. So they started asking questions. First, they requested a copy of the death certificate. It confirmed what the EMTs had said. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. But it also noted that a toxicology screen was pending. Danielle demanded to see the results. Jasmine refused. "This is a private medical matter," she told the family's attorney. "As Calvin's wife and executor, I have sole authority. I suggest they move on." But Danielle didn't move on. She moved forward with a subpoena. And when the toxicology report came back, everything changed. Inside Calvin's bloodstream were trace levels of zolpidem and diazepam, two sedatives commonly used for insomnia and anxiety. Neither had been prescribed to him. Combined with alcohol, those substances could depress the central nervous system, slow heart rate, and induce cardiac arrest, especially in someone who didn't know they'd taken them. He hadn't been tired. He'd been drugged. Danielle sat in silence as the medical examiner reviewed the results with her and Marcus. She didn't cry. Not yet. Marcus, on the other hand, clenched his jaw. "She killed him," he whispered, "or someone helped her do it." The medical examiner hesitated. "I can't say that yet, but I can tell you this. This wasn't natural." And just like that, the narrative shifted. Calvin Mitchell hadn't died peacefully beside a pool. He had died in the center of a calculated, cold-blooded plan. And Jasmine Rowe wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. She was a suspect. After the toxicology report confirmed what Danielle and Marcus had feared, that their father, Calvin Mitchell, had been drugged, not simply struck down by a failing heart. The tone of the investigation changed. No longer a grieving family dispute. Now, it was a potential homicide case. Danielle pressed the Maricopa County Coroner's office to amend the death certificate. She worked alongside their civil attorney to unseal medical records and demand access to all surveillance data from the Mitchell estate. Meanwhile, Marcus turned his focus elsewhere, the guest house. At the far end of the estate, behind the rose garden and past the gated courtyard, sat a detached one-bedroom cottage. It was meant for guests, weekend visitors, or staff who needed to stay late. But Calvin hadn't had overnight visitors in years, at least not that his children knew of. One person, however, had noticed someone was living there. Jose Martinez, the landscaper who had cared for the Mitchell property for nearly a decade, reached out to Marcus after hearing about the death. He hesitated at first, said he didn't want to get involved, but eventually shared something troubling. Around mid-August, Jose said, "I started seeing this guy, white tank top, tattoos on his neck, maybe late 20s. He'd hang around the guest house. Never spoke to me. Just watched." Jose said the man had Texas plates on his car and came and went at odd hours. At first, Jose assumed he was a friend of Jasmine's. But after Calvin's death, the man disappeared. Overnight, Marcus passed this information along to the police, who cross-referenced security logs from the estate's electronic gate. Sure enough, an old garage access code, one that Calvin hadn't used in years, had been reactivated. That code had been used repeatedly between August 20th and September 1st. Detectives began reviewing deliveries made to the guest house during that time. What they uncovered was even more disturbing. Using online tracking records, they traced a series of prepaid purchases shipped to a side entrance of the estate. The items included a compact wireless camera system with Wi-Fi disabling capability, multiple pairs of nitrile gloves, a digital lock pick set, and 2 chemical compounds, zolpidem tartrate and diazepam, the very drugs found in Calvin's bloodstream. The packages had been signed for using the initials TC. Danielle knew exactly who that was. Trevor Cruz, Jasmine's younger brother. A quick search of public records revealed that Trevor had a criminal past. In 2019, he had been convicted of wire fraud in Dallas after a failed cryptocurrency scheme that cost investors over $200,000. He served 14 months before disappearing from public view. His last known address had been in El Paso, just a short drive from where Jasmine had grown up. Suddenly, things started falling into place. Trevor had arrived at the Mitchell estate 10 days before Calvin's death. He had access to the property. He had ordered the drugs. And now he was gone. The Mitchell's attorney moved quickly, presenting the findings to the Scottsdale Police Department, who assigned Detective Raymond Voss to take over the case. Voss had a reputation for handling complex financial and digital crime. He wasn't interested in theories. He wanted proof. On September 18th, armed with a search warrant, Voss and his team entered the guest house. Inside, it was nearly empty but not clean. In the fire pit behind the cottage, detectives discovered burnt paper, partially melted plastic, and something that looked like a torn signature page. Forensic specialists recovered enough fragments to identify it. An unsigned amendment to Calvin Mitchell's estate trust. The signatures were smudged, but one name stood out: Trevor Cruz. Inside the guest house, officers also found an iPad registered to Calvin's business account. It had been wiped clean of user data, but Apple's device ID revealed it had been synced to a Gmail address traced back to Jasmine's financial email account. Meanwhile, traffic cameras from nearby highways captured something else. On the night of September 18th, just hours after the search warrant was executed, a gray Audi A4 was recorded leaving the Austin area, headed north. The car had been rented under a false identity linked to Trevor Cruz. The license plate had been registered to a company that didn't exist. The hunt was on. 3 days later, on September 21st, U.S. Marshals located Trevor at a roadside motel near Reno, Nevada. He didn't resist arrest, but what he had in his duffel bag shocked everyone. $18,000 in cash, 2 fake Texas driver's licenses, a Rolex Daytona, later confirmed as Calvin's, reported missing after his death, a USB flash drive with encrypted files, and a handwritten note. Pool night equals green light. Remove backups. That line was identical to a calendar entry Jasmine had added to Calvin's iCloud the night before his death. Dinner and pool night. The night before, in the guest house, the air had been tense. Jasmine stood by the kitchen sink, whispering fiercely while Trevor sat slouched on the couch, scrolling through his burner phone. "This is it," Jasmine said. "No mistakes." Trevor didn't look up. "You keep saying that." "I mean it. If anything goes wrong, if he talks, if the cameras aren't fully wiped, everything falls apart." He finally looked at her. "You think I don't know that? I'm the one with the gloves and the syringes, remember? You're the one who almost signed your real name on the package last week," she snapped. "You want to go back to jail? Because I'm not going with you." Trevor stood, his voice low but dangerous. "Don't act like you're not in this just as deep." "I am," she said. "But unlike you, I plan to walk away clean." They stared at each other for a long beat. Then Trevor scoffed and sat back down. Jasmine turned away, her hands trembling. This wasn't love. This was survival, and she intended to be the only one left standing. The connection was no longer circumstantial. It was coordinated. By the time Trevor Cruz was escorted in handcuffs onto a U.S. Marshal plane bound for Texas, the case had reached a boiling point. The media had caught wind of the story. An aging tech tycoon, a young Instagram model, a secretive brother with a criminal past, and a sudden death beside a glowing backyard pool. But there was still one person left untouched by law enforcement, and that was about to change. On September 25th, just 4 days after Trevor's arrest, Jasmine Rowe was taken into custody at the Mitchell estate. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I need to call my attorney." She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraudulent schemes and artifices, forgery, obstruction of justice. Prosecutors had already built a devastating case, but they weren't done. What they found next would shift the narrative from suspicion to certainty. As part of the digital search, detectives submitted a legal request to Apple to access Jasmine's iCloud backups. Among routine files, photos, calendars, and messages, they uncovered something chilling. A voice memo dated August 26, 2024. In the recording, Jasmine's voice is calm, almost casual. You can hear the clink of glass in the background, maybe wine, maybe water. Then she says, "It's not like he'll miss the money. He's old. I'm done being broke." There was no indication she had shared the file. It hadn't been emailed, texted, or saved to another device. It was likely a personal note, a draft of something never meant to be heard. But now, it would become the emotional center of the trial. On February 10th, 2025, in the Maricopa County Superior Court, the case of the state of Arizona versus Jasmine Rowe and Trevor Cruz officially began. Judge Ella Morano, known for her no-nonsense approach, presided. Jury selection took 2 days. The final panel included 12 jurors and 2 alternates, a mix of retirees, small business owners, and civil servants. All of them had heard the whispers. Many had seen the headlines, but they agreed to listen with an open mind. The prosecution opened strong. They laid out a precise, month-by-month timeline. July 28th, zolpidem and diazepam ordered online using a prepaid debit card tied to Jasmine's email. August 10th, a forged trust amendment signed, witnessed, and notarized, naming Jasmine as sole beneficiary. August 29th, surveillance system disabled. Backup drives erased. August 30th, Calvin Mitchell dies by the pool. September 4th. Jasmine attempts to wire $3.8 million to a brokerage in the Cayman Islands. Jasmine's defense attorneys called it circumstantial. They claimed she was manipulated by her brother, Trevor, who used her grief and desperation to access Calvin's fortune. They painted her as naive, out of her depth, and emotionally dependent. But that image didn't hold up for long. On the fourth day of trial, Trevor Cruz took the stand. His appearance was emotionless. He wore a gray jumpsuit and looked straight ahead. No glances at Jasmine. No tears. Under oath, he testified that Jasmine had planned everything. She told me it would be fast, he said. She said he wouldn't feel a thing. Trevor claimed he had only helped scare Calvin, never intended to kill him. But when pressed, he admitted to administering the sedatives in Calvin's wine on the night of his death. When the prosecutor asked him why he agreed, Trevor paused. Because she promised me a cut, and I believed her. More damning than Trevor's testimony was the digital evidence. Investigators showed screenshots of deleted text messages retrieved from Jasmine's iCloud. In one message to a friend, for days before Calvin's death, Jasmine wrote, "His kids hate me. Once he's gone, it's mine. All of it." Then came the calendar entry, dinner and pool night, crescent moon, white heavy check mark, which lined up exactly with Trevor's handwritten note. Pool night equals green light. Remove backups. Expert witnesses, including a digital forensics analyst, testified to the metadata confirming the note and the calendar entry were created the same day, August 29th. The jury sat stone-faced. A few shook their heads. Then, the prosecution dropped one final blow. On the seventh day, Danielle Mitchell took the stand. When Danielle approached the witness stand, she didn't look at the jury. She looked straight at Jasmine. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge paused for a beat longer than usual. Danielle took a breath and spoke slowly. "You pretended to care," she said. "You sat at our dinner table. You called him babe. You wore my mother's apron. And while you smiled for Instagram, you were planning to take everything from him. From us." Jasmine didn't flinch. "You didn't just kill my father," Danielle continued. "You erased him. You cremated him before we could say goodbye. You shut us out of his life while we were still grieving Mom. And for what? A house? A pool? A few hashtags? And a Porsche?" Her voice broke. She quickly wiped her eyes and added, "Calvin Mitchell wasn't just some rich old man. He was a father, a good man, and he deserved better than becoming a postscript to your brand." The jury didn't move. Some had tears in their eyes. She spoke with quiet strength, telling the court about her father's character, his trust in Jasmine, and the pain of not being able to say goodbye. "He wasn't a perfect man," she said, "but he deserved better than to be drugged and discarded like an old checkbook." Marcus followed. He described the moment he discovered the surveillance logs had been erased, how he pieced together the purchases, and how helpless he felt when no one believed him at first. On cross-examination, the defense asked if Marcus had ever confronted his father directly about Jasmine. His answer, "We tried." He said she made him feel alive again. He paused, looked at Jasmine, then added, "Trust cost him his life." On March 4th, 2025, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Jasmine Rowe, guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice. Sentence: 32 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Trevor Cruz, as part of his cooperation agreement, he received 28 years for second-degree murder, financial fraud, and destruction of evidence. Jasmine was transferred to the Arizona Women's Correctional Facility in Goodyear. All assets in her name were frozen. The attempted wire transfer was blocked. The forged trust was legally voided. And in April 2025, Danielle and Marcus Mitchell used a portion of the restored estate to create the Calvin Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit supporting sustainable farming in underserved communities. The courtroom had gone silent when the word guilty was read aloud. Jasmine Rowe showed no visible reaction. She didn't cry. She didn't look at her brother. She just sat there, frozen, like the mask she had worn for months had finally turned to stone. For Danielle and Marcus Mitchell, it wasn't victory. It wasn't even relief. It was grief all over again, but this time with closure. Their father, Calvin, was never coming back. The house would never echo with his voice again. There'd be no more phone calls, no Sunday barbecues, no quiet, "I'm proud of you" moments. That had all been taken. But what hadn't been taken was his legacy. In April 2025, 1 month after the trial concluded, Danielle and Marcus announced the formation of the Calvin Mitchell Foundation for Agricultural Innovation. The nonprofit would provide grants, scholarships, and technical support to small, struggling farmers across Texas and the Southwest, particularly in drought-prone regions. It was the work Calvin had dedicated his life to. The foundation was seeded with $6.2 million, money that had once nearly been stolen through deceit, manipulation, and murder. Now, it would serve the people Calvin had always cared about most. He always believed that food security was the future of this country, Marcus said during the foundation's launch. Now his name will help make that future possible. The foundation's first scholarship was awarded in June to a 19-year-old daughter of a farm worker in New Mexico. Her acceptance letter ended with a simple sentence: "Thank you for believing in someone like me." With the Forge Amendment to Calvin's trust officially voided, the original estate plan, drafted in 2018, was reinstated. All assets, including the Barton Creek residence, business shares, vehicles, and investment portfolios, were split evenly between Danielle and Marcus. Jasmine's property, everything from designer jewelry to digital assets, was seized as part of the court's restitution order. The $3.8 million wire transfer attempt to the Cayman Islands was permanently blocked. Trevor Cruz, incarcerated at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, became eligible for parole no earlier than 2047. He has filed no appeal. He receives no visitors. As for Jasmine, she now spends her days in the Arizona Women's Correctional Facility. Her influencer accounts have been taken down. Her name, once attached to filtered photos and self-help captions, is now only found in criminal court records and archived news footage. Danielle still lives in Dallas. She hasn't stepped foot in the Barton Creek house since the trial ended. "It's not the home I grew up in anymore," she told a local reporter. "Too many ghosts live in those walls." Marcus stayed in Austin. He visits the foundation offices weekly. But the laughter that once filled their family's world, it never returned. "You think you're doing the right thing," he once said. And we were. But no one tells you that justice still feels like loss. There are no celebrations after something like this. Only quiet mornings. Only empty chairs. And every once in a while, a new letter arrives at the foundation, signed by someone who found hope because Calvin once believed in innovation, in decency, in people. That's the part Jasmine and Trevor never understood. Calvin Mitchell wasn't just a man of wealth. He was a man of purpose. On Father's Day, Danielle and Marcus returned, just once, to the cemetery where a small bronze plaque now marks their father's final resting place. There are no grand statues, no marble columns, just a modest stone that reads, Calvin James Mitchell, 1968 to 2024, a builder, a believer, a father. Danielle knelt beside it, holding a single sunflower, his favorite. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner," she whispered. Beside her, Marcus placed a small folded piece of paper. It was a drawing his son had made, his first grandchild, whom Calvin never got to meet. The paper read, "Grandpa Calvin, we love you." In a press statement, the Mitchell family wrote, "This tragedy has taught us that love, when used as a weapon, becomes something more dangerous than hate. We hope our story warns others, especially those who are aging, wealthy, or lonely, not to ignore their instincts and not to silence the voices of those who truly care." The story of Calvin Mitchell may be over in court, but it continues, in farms made more efficient, in students empowered to change the world, and in every family who now thinks twice before brushing off their concern for a loved one in a new relationship that moves too fast, feels too curated, or seems too perfect. Because sometimes, the most beautiful mask hides the darkest truth. This has been the story of Calvin Mitchell, a man who gave his heart to the wrong person and paid the ultimate price. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories that reveal the human truth behind headlines. And remember, trust is earned, not given. long before police cars lined up outside the Mitchell estate, long before lawyers debated the meaning of a calendar entry and a voice memo shook a courtroom, long before a grieving daughter stood over her father's grave. There was an Instagram post, just a photo. It showed Jasmine Rowe smiling in a wide-brimmed hat beside a crystal blue pool. A glass of rose in her hand, one leg casually dipped in the water. Her caption read, "Manifesting joy, surround yourself with peace and people who get you #new beginnings." It received over 7,000 likes. One commenter wrote, "Girl, you deserve it all." Another, "He's lucky to have you." But behind the filter, behind the likes and hashtags, behind the well-lit brunch plates and infinity pool selfies, was a plan. A plan that would leave a man dead, a family broken, and a community reeling from how easily evil had disguised itself as love. Jasmine Rowe curated her life like a luxury brand. She had once been a modest influencer in the fitness and wellness space. Her page was filled with product promos, transformation photos, inspirational quotes, and perfectly filtered glimpses into a life many dreamed of, but few questioned. Even after she met Calvin, her narrative didn't change. It evolved. Now she was the healed woman, the one who found peace in older love. She posted cryptic captions like, "When the soul is seen, age is irrelevant. He lets me be me. That's real wealth." For those scrolling casually, it looked like a love story. For those looking deeper, it was marketing. She rarely posted Calvin's face. Only his cars, his home, his pool, his wine. The man himself had become an aesthetic, a backdrop for her rebrand. He wasn't a husband. He was a lifestyle prop. According to testimony revealed during the trial, Jasmine managed everything in Calvin's life. She filtered his emails. She spoke on his behalf during investor calls. She even reset his phone passcode and rerouted shipping addresses to a private P.O. box. Friends said Calvin was more withdrawn after the marriage. Some chalked it up to age, others to grief. But Danielle and Marcus saw it for what it was, isolation. By the time he died, Calvin had no direct access to several of his own accounts. Jasmine handled the finances. She organized the calendar. She oversaw the household staff. She even asked the family attorney to speak to her directly instead of Calvin whenever possible. And all the while, her online presence painted a very different picture. Healing, growth, alignment, words that would one day appear on slideshows during a homicide trial. What happened to Calvin Mitchell wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a generational warning. For many older Americans, social media can feel like another language, one that younger people use fluently, even seductively. But just because someone knows how to craft a good story online doesn't mean that story is true. Behind every polished photo, there may be someone like Jasmine, someone who knows exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to turn affection into currency. Calvin wasn't naive. He was lonely, and loneliness, especially after grief, is a door that opportunists love to walk through. The final Instagram post from Jasmine's account was made the day before Calvin died. A photo of 2 wine glasses by the pool, one full, one half empty. The caption, "To soft nights and forever love." It was removed 2 weeks later, after her arrest. But screenshots of it still circulate in forums, true crime groups, and media articles. Not as a tribute, but as a reminder. Not everything that glitters on a screen is gold, and not every love story told online ends with a happily ever after. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think twice about trust, relationships, or appearances, share it. There's someone out there who needs this warning more than you know. Subscribe for more true crime stories that go beyond the headlines and straight to the human truth.